You ever get that feel, scrolling your feed or maybe a playlist comes on? It just feels like, wow, this thing gets me. It knows what I like, what I'm feeling, almost knows me. But what if that feeling isn't really about discovery? What if it's more by design? What if who we are isn't something we just find anymore, but something that's, well, actively shaped by these systems we use every day? Today, we're doing a deep dive, really pulling back the curtain on this paper, Performing the Self for the Algorithm by Skylar Fiction. We want to unpack how these recommender systems, the algorithms, are subtly but honestly profoundly changing who we are, moving us from trying to be authentic to trying to be optimized.
Yeah, it's a really crucial topic.
Yeah.
We're going to explore how platforms, the big ones, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, they seem like they're all about personalization, right?
Hmm.
But actually, they might be doing something called emotional engineering, using a kind of behavioral conditioning, really, to subtly influence not just what we watch or listen to, but our actual identity, how we see
Really?
ourselves.
Okay, so let's unpack that. This core idea. The paper argues the algorithm is like a mirror. But, and this is key, it's not a passive mirror. It doesn't just reflect us as we are, it reflects us back as we perform best. Which means it amplifies the stuff that gets attention and kind of silences the rest. Fiction puts it pretty bluntly. In the age of machines that watch us, authenticity has been replaced with optimization.
Ooh, that really hits home, doesn't it?
It does. And you see it so clearly, like on TikTok's For You feed, they use this hybrid system, and it's basically designed to push content that gets a big emotional reaction. Those short videos, funny, angry, sexy, dramatic. It's not just showing you things it thinks you'll like based on the past. It feels more like
Yeah.
it's training you, conditioning you.
Exactly. Training is the right word. And it's definitely not accidental. There's research, like Nick Seaver's work with engineers, showing they intentionally build these systems to hook us. They use these patterns of microfeedback. It sounds a lot like Skinnerian conditioning, reinforcing certain behaviors with little rewards. These feedback loops, they effectively become the structure for how our identity gets built online. And the implication for yourself, for how you see yourself, is huge. Whatever gets likes, shares, views, it gets reinforced. It shapes your sense of self-worth, tying it to engagement. So identity becomes less about who am I really and more about algorithmic adaptation. You learn pretty fast, not what you truly like, but what works, what gets seen.
What really grabbed me was how the paper connects this to like classic sociology, George Herbert Mead's ideas, remember the generalized other, that sort of collective sense of society or the audience you imagine that shapes how you act.
The day.
Right, the they. Well, the paper suggests that in our digital world, the machine itself, the algorithm, is becoming that. That TikTok and YouTube are effectively the new generalized other.
It's a really powerful idea and a bit unsettling, frankly. It makes you think of thinkers like Baudrillard warning about hyperreality,
Mm.
where the simulation, the representation starts feeling more real than actual reality.
Yeah.
The paper basically argues that this algorithmic version of the self, the one that's curated, optimized, always emotionally reactive, it's starting to overshadow the messy, quieter, more human self we used to think of.
And you can see the real world effects, can't you?
Yeah.
Especially with younger people. There's research by Ionescu and Liku on TikTok. It shows adolescents consciously, deliberately tailoring their content to what they think the algorithm wants. They prioritize the performance over just being authentic.
Right.
It creates this platform attuned way of being. And it leads to what some performance theorists call the modular self, like this fluid identity you just adapt depending on the platform, the audience, the metrics.
And the currency in this whole system is emotion. But not just feeling emotion. It's that emotion itself is the currency of visibility. Think about that. Platforms trade in our emotional responses to decide what gets seen. Usang's 2024 study really highlights this. Emotionally charged stuff, especially if it taps into group identity or outrage. It just dominates.
Wow.
Yeah, her study found posts with negative emotional tags got something like a 67% higher reshare rate.
Yeah.
And they were twice as likely to get promoted by the algorithm.
So negativity gets amplified.
And crucially, it's not just genuine emotion, it's the performance of it. Ionescu and Liosi observed adolescents actually feigning sadness or joy or vulnerability because that authentic-looking emotion, even if it's totally staged, gets rewarded by the algorithm. People talk about hitting the algorithm, and the engineers, they literally tune to maximize affect. They design it to provoke and reward these emotional displays.
Okay, so this paints a pretty Well, a concerning picture. How the algorithm gets under our skin shapes our sense of self. So, what does this actually mean for you, for me, navigating these spaces? The paper points to some real costs: homogenization, feeling fragmented, and just exhaustion.
Absolutely. Let's start with homogenization. Renzu looked at TikTok's content loops. As the algorithm learns what works, it just promotes more and more of the same stuff. It leads to this really narrow range of feelings of aesthetics. Someone called it a digital monoculture, like a garden where all the flowers start looking the same.
Mm.
Yu Zhang calls it algorithmic flattening. Unique, different stuff gets pushed down in favor of these predictable emotional patterns, and often that just reinforces existing biases, right? Gender stereotypes, political divides.
So, what feels like endless choice?
Is actually, yeah, a curated cage. It feels infinite,
Mhm.
but the walls are closing in.
And then there's this internal fragmentation you mentioned. We're sort of encouraged, maybe subconsciously, to build these different versions of ourselves online. Your public profile, maybe an anonymous account, your niche interest identity. And each one is judged by how it performs, not by whether it's, like, true to you.
Exactly. And that creates this dissonance, this internal conflict. You start asking, okay, who am I when the algorithm isn't watching?
Mm.
What parts of me are too quiet, too nuanced to even register?
Mm-hmm.
And that constant performance, the pressure to keep up, it just leads to burnout. It's exhausting. Ionescu and Liku have a great term for it. Algorithmic fatigue. This chronic feeling that you have to stay relevant, you have to keep performing, keep curating your emotions.
The pressure must be immense.
It is. And the fear isn't just about losing followers if you drop off the feed. It's deeper. It's like losing your identity. Because the self only feels real when it is being seen.
Mm.
It's an exhaustion that's, as they say, spiritual as much as psychological. It's like Baudrillard, again, the simulation of who you are online starts to feel more substantial than the real you.
Let's zoom out even more now, because the paper makes this really powerful point. The algorithm does not care whether you like what you see. It only cares that you look. And maybe disturbingly, what keeps us looking often isn't joy or connection, it's friction, conflict.
Right. This idea of the machine that feeds on friction. Research by Zhang and Ferraro found that negative content, especially stuff that makes you angry or morally outraged, gets way more engagement than positive or neutral stuff. And as Milano and Floridi point out, these recommender systems, they don't judge content. They don't care if it's true or ethical or good for society. They just track interaction, clicks, shares, comments, and they optimize to get more of that interaction. So basically, a lie that makes you mad is more profitable than a truth that makes you calm.
Which leads directly to what the paper calls algorithmic antagonism and epistemic instability. Our feeds become these echo chambers of outrage. And it's not necessarily because we go looking for fights, but because the machine has learned that division is a gold mine.
Yeah.
Your feed ends up reflecting what you react against, what you fight. Zhang puts it chillingly. Truth collapses under the weight of engagement metrics. What's true matters less than what gets a reaction.
And there's solid evidence for this. Zhang's 2024 study showed these systems optimize for effective intensity, not for understanding different viewpoints. It leads to polarization clustering. Basically, you get algorithmically grouped with people who think like you and shielded from other views. It creates an epistemic firewall.
Wow, an epistemic firewall.
Yeah. Her data showed people exposed to personalized political feeds reported I think it was a 31% increase in negative words used to describe opposing groups.
Just from the feed itself.
Right. And other research shows that emotionally provocative political content gets up to 2.5 times more interaction than neutral reporting. The system is basically designed to inflame.
And this has that chilling effect of imagining the enemy, right? Ferraro and colleagues described how these systems promote false consensus, making you think everyone agrees with you. And then they show you these, decontextualized extreme examples from the other side, turning disagreement into actual disgust.
It's really damaging. In one trial they did, people exposed to these partisan feeds were 40% less willing to even talk to someone from the opposing party in real life.
40%. That's huge for just civil conversation.
It really is. And it points to this bigger breakdown of trust. Zhang argues that these systems are eroding the foundations of democracy. Trust, dialogue, even a shared sense of reality. We're not just seeing different news feeds. We're literally being shaped into different psychological realities.
Okay, so we've talked about the internal costs, the fragmentation, the exhaustion, and now the societal division. It really makes you wonder, beyond all that, what's the personal psychological toll? Day to day, living in this kind of optimized world. The paper talks about anxiety, dissociation, and the digital inner life.
Yeah, the personal fallout is significant. Ionescu and Ligia's review from 2023 found that adolescents spending a lot of time on feeds like TikToks, which are so emotionally manipulative, show much higher rates of social anxiety, lower self-worth, and this constant fear of becoming irrelevant. Your personal value becomes tethered to algorithmic visibility. You only feel worthwhile if the algorithm notices you.
That's deeply concerning.
It is. And many users report feeling like a different person online versus offline, like they don't recognize themselves in their content history. There's a real disconnect.
And this links back to that survival thing you mentioned, adopting emotions personas just to keep up.
Exactly. That effective mirroring leads to a kind of emotional dissociation. You're performing feelings so much, you might lose touch with your actual feelings. The digital body, as Zhang puts it, isn't valued for health or authenticity, but just for its algorithmic potential.
And maybe the scariest part is that fear of becoming invisible. Seaver said it well. The trap of the algorithm is that you must continue to feed it in order to believe you still exist.
It's a profound trap. So the question becomes, what can we actually do? If these systems are acting as invisible architects of identity, where does the responsibility lie? Well, some researchers, like Ferraro and colleagues, are proposing a shift. They suggest designing systems that prioritize commonality.
Commonality. What does that mean in practice?
It means intentionally designing algorithms to highlight shared cultural references, things that build connection across different groups, rather than just reinforcing our existing tribes, designing for pluralism and diversity of identity.
So it's not just about being neutral, it's an active design choice towards connection.
Precisely. Algorithms can be programmed differently. They can promote underrepresented voices, slow down the spread of emotional manipulation, give users more transparency, more agency.
But that would mean, well, it would mean challenging the whole business model, wouldn't it? Breaking from this surveillance capitalism model that just wants maximum engagement, whatever the cost.
It absolutely requires that break, and it forces us to ask a much deeper question. What kind of self do we actually want our technology to encourage? Mead's original idea of the self was formed through dialogue, empathy, mutual recognition, real human connection.
Right.
So maybe that means bringing different voices into tech, design, humanities, scholars, ethicists, diverse communities, treating platforms not just as neutral tools, but as powerful social actors with real responsibilities, and questioning this core assumption that more engagement is always better.
The paper's conclusion really sticks with you. It says, "We were promised a mirror, but we were given a cage." That personalization somehow morphed into performance, and convenience became a form of control. Our feeds aren't just reflecting our choices anymore, they're actively reshaping them. They're selling us identities, not just products.
And the solution proposed isn't about escaping technology altogether. It's about resistance, not as escape, but as design.
Hmm.
That means things like practicing digital humility, just admitting, yeah, these things are shaping us,
Yeah.
and embracing slowness, creating space for the parts of ourselves that aren't optimized for clicks.
And maybe choosing disconnection sometimes.
Exactly. Choosing disconnection not as withdrawal, but as rebellion, a conscious choice to step outside the performance cage.
Because the real battle, it seems, isn't against the tech itself. It's against the belief that we are nothing more than what can be captured, measured, or sold, reclaiming our own unquantifiable value.
Which brings us to that beautiful final reminder in the paper. To be human is to be unfinishable, to be unmarketable, to be sacred. There's something deeply resonant about that.
There really is. So maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to kind of mull over. How could you personally start reclaiming those parts of yourself the algorithm can't easily code? Maybe by actively seeking out moments of quiet, or embracing the contradictions within yourself, or even just pursuing experiences that defy easy categorization, finding the messy, complex, truly human bits again.